sure we will have some folks joining us in the next few minutes, but I do want to be respectful of everyone's time here today. So we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Research Cafe. As many of you know, this is put on by the Dare to Terra Scholars, and we are a part of the Responsible Research in Business and Management group. So as many of us know, or I hope you do because you are here demonstrating your interest, responsible research really refers to ideas and research that moves the world. So as responsible researchers, we are trying to create credible knowledge that we can then use in the business and management environment. We're also tackling big issues, social issues, economic issues. Again, like I said, grand challenges, things that really change the way we think about and view the world. I'm going to introduce the topic of the day and our presenters, but before I do that, I just want to mention our Dare to Care Scholarship Program. So many of you here on the call today are junior in your careers, and the Dare to Care Scholarship Program is really designed for those PhD students moving into their dissertation. We'd like to encourage this kind of responsible research, and so the RRBM has put together a scholarship for those of you doing dissertation work in this area. You can find more information online that has been posted in the chat. The applications for this will be due in November, and our first award will be next spring. So if you are a PhD student moving into your dissertation, this is a really great opportunity to get some funding for the work that you are doing. With that, I'd like to take a quick moment to introduce our organizing team. So I am Melissa Chamberlain. I will be your MC for today, walking us through the day's events. We've also got Bori and Liz, who have helped coordinate registration. You guys maybe have seen them via email. We've got Chris today, who is going to be on our chat. He'll be monitoring questions and comments as they come through and posting important information for us over there. And then we have Anne, who is our sponsor and advisor directly from RRBM. I think most of us are pretty familiar with the Zoom thing at this point, but just as a reminder, we are going to record the session. So please keep that in mind. It will be available for everyone after we are done. Also, we know Zoom etiquette. Please leave your cameras on because we do want a fairly engaged and interactive session today. But I would ask at this point that we keep our mics off. There will be a chance to come off the mic and engage with some of our authors a little bit later. But for this first point, we'll let the authors themselves have the floor. Our agenda for the day, we're going to have two wonderful sets of authors present their work. And then we'll have some time for a breakout session afterwards to dig into some of the details of their work. We are specifically focused here on the methods and study design because we know that a lot of us have really great ideas related to responsible research, but often need ways to execute those ideas. So our authors here today are going to provide some ways that we can do that. Without too much more ado, I'd like to turn over the floor to our first presenter, Luis. Please take it away.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to always be a part of an event organized by this fantastic network. And I'm always fascinated about giving a chat on this paper that is really, really close to my research interest and motivation. And this is a paper with Mike Usim and Tyler Wry that, by the way, these two were part of my dissertation committee, now good friends, partners in the quest of causal identification in this profession, and for this specific study on the effects of company engagement in helping societies recover from disasters. So you probably have your coffee, or as in my case, your tea, and I want to put the there in the title of this event, and I want you to reflect for a moment, just for a moment, on what you think is the most important question in your area of interest. Now, reflect upon the obstacles that makes this an unanswered question. And one can predict that a likely central issue is empirical in nature, right? So maybe it's the lack of quality data for general validity and statistical regularities. Maybe it's internal validity because of the ability to measure what one wants to measure. As you are there, I'd like to dare you that by the end of this event, you have a really general outline of a plan to address this question. Now, for this, I want to propose that there are three key elements that will guide your endeavor. The first one is inspiration, because obviously, the more overlap you have with your own motivation and this research question, the higher the ability that you'll have to navigate the complexities, especially the empirical complexities of answering this question. The second element is to understand what you bring to the table. Age, what is your comparative advantage vis-a-vis other scholars? And the third one is rigor. What are you going to do to enlarge this empirical binding constraint? Now, these three elements are essential to discuss the empirical journey of this study. So let me start with the first one. I have always been connected with the theme in my professional career. I spent my time at the financial sector, designing and trading derivatives to hedge against rates, currency movements, economic downturns, and even weather events. But really the starting point for this study was my time in India, conducting randomized controlled trials on microinsurance for the poverty lab as a student at the MIT. You can see that I'm rocking the same hairstyle right now. At that time, it was because of the Indian summer, but now you know the reason, COVID-19. This was 2 years after the Indian Ocean tsunami. And thus I had the opportunity to witness the depth and breadth of the action of business organizations in helping communities recover from the shock. I saw, for instance, how a manufacturing company created a telemedicine lab that connected a community that had lost its medical facility to the regional hospital miles away. I saw schools built and run by plastic companies in very isolated villages of Kalahandi, water purification plants in Rajamundry. And I pack all these lessons and just later will use them to write my dissertation, which this paper is the third chapter, by the way. At Wharton, it was natural to team up with Mike Yusim, someone that had been interested on the effects of disasters for some time. And he invited me to participate on a book project documenting Chile's response to the tsunami and earthquake that affected the country in 2010. Here's Mike with the former Chilean president and his ministers. This event was really, really important because having access to all the data that the Chilean government had on funding the recovery was important for our study. Because we quickly understood that a substantial part of the extraordinary comeback of Chile from disaster was the engagement of the business community. You see, for the first time in the history of emergency response, this sector accounted for more international aid than the total amount for relief and recovery from all other entities combined. I'm talking about multilateral agencies, governments, non-profit organizations, and even private charity. And this started as a trend. Actually, in the last years, we have seen several other cases where the business community is actually giving than the total amount from other entities. And we saw also in these past 20 years that this area is the fastest growing among all areas of company pro-social behavior. Now, this yields this question that for us was really, really important. Is this efficient from the social standpoint? Yeah, okay, a thorough evaluation of the literature at that time tells us that we have a vast work about the drivers of company pro-social behavior. And on the consequences, the focus has been the financial implications for the organization. But the doing good part of the equation has remained understudied. And by the way, if you yet is highly neglected. So I totally endorse the idea of, if you are interested, bringing more research to understanding the social consequences of company pro-social behavior. And with Tyler Wry, who was naturally attracted to the project given his interest on social impact, we embarked ourselves in trying to answer this question. Now, you can imagine that at the essence of this answer is a comparative evaluation. Is the business organization better equipped to help societies recover from disasters than even entities that were created for that purpose? For grasping an idea, we believe that we needed to fully understand the decision-making process, and with the help of the Wharton Center, we conducted interviews with managers of companies around the world, and we identified three mechanisms behind what we call the comparative advantage of corporate disaster given in economic recovery. The first one is the idea that companies with local operations can sense areas of recovery. They can understand the distress to the market. Second, they can seize opportunities to transfer resources from other geographies much faster than any other entity, and especially multilateral agencies, which are normally the entities that are at the center of bringing relief and recovery to affected countries. And the third one is the ability to reconfigure local assets. Think about the case of Coca-Cola, for instance, that converted the production lines to bottled drinking water and used the delivery network to bring the resource to the victims. Okay, so we have a theoretical framework. How do we test it? How do we test them? So we know that the British mining company Anglo American was able to help the children of Chile to return to school in record time after the disaster because it uses local operations and core competences to build the schools like this that, by the way, won an award for social innovation. But the question obviously is super complex because it entails, for instance, to try to understand what would have happened to a country like Chile that received 55% from business organizations in aid, substitute that from the hypothetical case of the country receiving aid from other entities, multilateral agencies and governments. And not only that, but given that we have this idea that local operations and core operations are at the essence of what we call the competitive advantage of some organizations, we also need to differentiate donations that come from other type of business organizations. So how did we do this? Well, first we carry out a large automated data collection and build a data set with every single reported donation from all types of organizations, including firms, obviously, for all the disasters that affected the world between 1990 and 2019. And then we use natural language processing to code different types of donations. So with this, for instance, let me give you this example. We could then identify, given that was from a company with local operations like Anglo American, from a company with no operations, such as the Chinese mining company, JCC, and from each donation, what portion was associated with the core operations of the company. Now, the second step was to understand the most efficient statistical method, obviously. And traditional panel methods present several constraints given the phenomenon that we are studying. Differences in differences, for instance, works really poorly when there is substantial change in the environmental variables, which is our case in the post-shock conditions of the country. Cause and exact matching and similar techniques need cases to be substantially similar. We simply did not have that, right? So because disasters are super unique. Disaster countries also entail a lot of idiosyncrasies that cannot be replicated across time. Well, we chose a relatively novel method at that time that is called synthetic control method. And this entails using a vector of variables that potentially explain the outcome. In our case, is the speed of aid and the magnitude of economic recovery of the country to create counterfactuals. Now, this is not a one-to-one matching, but it entails, for instance, find counterfactuals from pieces of different countries that together replicate the case of a country that was affected by a disaster and received substantial aid from business organizations. For instance, in the case of Chile in 2010, we have characteristics from Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and Paraguay.
2 minutes, Luis, 2 minutes.
And as you can see from, thank you. As you can see from this graph, the method does a good job in replicating the pre-shock trajectory of the country economy, as other articles or studies we document a substantial drop in the growth rate of economic development. In this case, we proxy this with the Human Development Index. But what is really important is what happens afterwards, right? So see the post-shock trend of the Human Development Index of a country that receives substantial aid from companies versus a counterfactual country. And we see that on the conditions that we outline, this type of pro-social behavior, at least in this setting, is socially beneficial, given that the inflation-adjusted real cost of disasters continue to rise, along with their implications on economic development around the world, and the fact that real public aid is stagnant in this area with a growing funding gap for recovery. Having an empirical design that can be replicated hopefully can help public and private actors around the world to stimulate and coordinate the power of business toward economic development. We obviously hope that this study helps for that purpose, and I'll stop here and thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for that. It looks like we can go ahead and move on. So I think, Anja, you are up and presenting.
All right, I started talking while unmuted, which I still have not gotten used to, even though we're over a year into this whole thing. All right, so hi everybody. My name is Anja Krstic, and I am an assistant professor at the School of Human Resources Management at York University, which is located in Toronto in Canada. And I am here to represent the other paper that we're kind of discussing today in the session. And I just want to make a note, my co-author on this paper, Ivona Hideg, is also here today. She is also at York University, but is in the Schulich School of Business. So she was my doctoral advisor at Wilfrid Laurier University and master's advisor as well. And then we ended up at the same university, which was unplanned, but a nice surprise. And a pleasant turn of events. And then also on this project, I just wanted to make a note of two of our co-authors who couldn't be here today. We have Raymond Trow, who's actually in Australia at Macquarie University, so he's probably sleeping right now. And then we also have Tanya Zarina, who actually works in corporate Canada and what I like to call like a real job. So she unfortunately couldn't be here today either. All right, so in terms of like what I'd like to talk about today, I just wanted to give you guys a quick overview of what we kind of examined in our paper, just in case, some people haven't had a chance to read the paper fully or at all, no judgment either way. And then kind of go over our study design and methodology really quickly, and then talk about some of the challenges that we faced and that we had to overcome. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about my journey to becoming a responsible researcher in the context of this paper, which we really worked on during a very formative time during, my training as a researcher. All right, so in terms of an overview of our paper, so here we examined the kind of unintended consequences of taking a longer versus shorter maternity leave for women's career outcomes. And in particular, in study one, we examined kind of agency perceptions as this underlying mechanism and these negative effects. And then in our next two studies, we examined two interventions that could kind of help women, provide them with the opportunity to take a longer leave while allowing them to kind of affirm their agency. So one of these interventions was, just providing additional information about the woman's agency. And then this other intervention was actually this kind of corporate policy or organizational policy that we also examined that would kind of do the same thing. All right, so in terms of the methodology, all three of our all three of our studies used experiments. And in particular, we used something called experimental vignette methodology. So basically, we ran the study kind of in the context of an internal promotion into a managerial position. And, participants were told that the purpose of the study is to, examine how hiring decisions are made kind of at the beginning stages of the hiring process. And so basically we gave participants a job description and application materials, which were inspired by a paper by Madeline Heilman and Tyler Akimoto, which we then modified. And then in studies 2 and 3, we also kind of provided this additional information based on the intervention that we were kind of looking at. And so, thinking about this kind of topic that we're examining, a lot of people might automatically think of maybe looking at some sort of archival data set to see, how women's careers are affected by taking maybe a maternity leave. But some of the benefits of this type of methodology for us is that, it really allowed us with the opportunity to examine other people's perceptions of women who take these maternity leaves. And how they can influence women's career outcomes. It also allowed us to kind of focus in on the mechanism that we examined, which was agency perceptions, and then in doing so allowed us to kind of examine whether these interventions to boost women's agency actually work. And then it also really allowed us to kind of control and keep consistent the information that we presented to our participants to really be able to kind of get at these effects. And so obviously a lot of benefits to this type of methodology, but it wasn't without its challenges. So one of the challenges that we kind of faced was the experimental realism of the application materials that we were using. And so just to kind of provide a little bit of context on what I mean by that. So this is what our job application actually looked like. I know it's a little bit blurry, and I'll kind of show you guys a blown up version of it in a second. But at the top here, we presented participants with information about this applicant, their current position, they were first, shown as being very highly educated. So they had an MBA degree. They, showed their current job duties, and even their like performance evaluation ratings were very high, suggesting that they were very competent and things like that. And then in the second half of this application, we provided this information about the applicant's maternity leave. And this was just showing our shorter maternity leave condition, which was a 1-month condition. And so again, this information was all kind of provided within the same job kind of application. And so when you think about it, the problem here was, information about parental leaves are usually not included in job applications. And in countries like Canada, I'm assuming also the US, asking these types of questions is illegal. You can't ask people, about their parental status or their family status or anything like that. And so we kind of needed to improve this. So this is the job application that we kind of use in study 1 and 2. And then in study 3, given that we were looking at this in the context of an internal promotion, what we did was we moved this information about this parental or maternity leave into this kind of internal human resources document that, somebody at the company would ostensibly, have access to. And that's where we kind of provided this information about the parental leave or the maternity leave. Another challenge that we kind of overcame was based on the kind of the framing of our paper, and this kind of popped up during the review process. So the way that our paper was kind of framed at the beginning when we originally submitted this to JP was, this problem exists. We did have study 2, which was one of our intervention studies, but I don't think we, or I know that we definitely didn't kind of play it up as an intervention as much as we could have, so it wasn't really clear. And one of our reviewers actually, brought up a good point, and they were like, do you really want to be those researchers that are being mentioned on CNN telling women to take shorter maternity leaves to kind of better their careers or to kind of help their career outcomes? And that was definitely not our intention. That's unfortunately maybe how we came across and maybe some of the wording. And so we had an opportunity to kind of fix this. And so we really shifted the framing of the paper to focus more on these interventions that could actually help women take these longer leaves while not incurring these negative career outcomes. And then when it comes to the, organizational intervention that we used, we knew that we wanted to do another intervention at that point, but we weren't sure what exactly that would look like. And so thankfully we had Tanya, again, our co-author, who she works in corporate Canada, and she really came up with this great idea to focus on this keep in touch policy. And it was actually a policy that was being used in corporate Canada. So she knew of companies that were kind of starting to introduce these types of policies. And so thanks to her, not only did we have this great intervention to test, but we also we tested a very real policy that had already existed. And then we were also able to kind of provide support for its effectiveness. So I kind of give you guys a little bit of the context of our study, our methodology and things like that. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about, my own journey to becoming a responsible researcher. So I've thrown up this kind of timeline of, when we kind of started conducting this study. So we began this project in the fall of 2013, submitted to JP in the fall of 2016, and then it was submitted or accepted for publication in the spring of 2018. But one thing to note here is that this really overlaps with my time as, an undergraduate student, a master's student, and a doctoral student. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about how this working on this project helped shape me as a researcher and as a responsible researcher. So up until, so when I began working on this project with Ivona, I was actually very new to her lab, and I had actually never conducted organizational behavior research before this point. I was in a psychology program. I just finished my undergraduate thesis in developmental psychology, where I was working with children. And that experience with my undergraduate thesis helped me realize that even though I really loved research, and I wanted to, pursue a graduate degree, a master's, at least a PhD, I knew that it was not going to be in developmental psychology. I saw that it was not for me. And so I had heard of Ivona. We ended up working as a research assistant in her lab, and this was one of the first projects that she kind of brought up, and I was just fascinated by it. Just based on my own personal experiences, I was in my early 20s at that point. And in particular, in the kind of the culture that I grew up in, so I was born in the former Yugoslavia. I started, although similar, perceptions in North America as well, but I did start to notice these kinds of differences in terms of gender roles and gendered expectations for men and women and things like that. And in particular, in my own culture, there was this similar push for both men and women to be, highly educated, to get a good job and things like that. But I did notice there was a huge difference in expectations in terms of, housework and childcare and things like that. And so that was kind of during, my formative years, as I was just kind of starting to notice these things. So I was really fascinated by this project. We ended up turning it into, a directed study, which helped me kind of get into a master's program. My master's research project was based on this project as well. And it really kind of took me through my doctoral studies as well. I completed my doctoral studies in the summer of 2019. And so not only this, but this research also inspired my doctoral dissertation. So in that, I examined the other side of the coin, so the effect of taking a paternity leave on men's career outcomes. And even that research also, falls into the realm of responsible research, in that it really it draws upon, or it touches upon gender equality, because, we can't have true gender equality without offering men the opportunities to also spend time with and bond with their children and things like that. So we need gender equality both in the home and in the workplace. And, beyond my dissertation, this paper ultimately, helped me get my job, the one that I have now, because I had a second author JAP under my belt when I went on the job market. And so just to kind of conclude all of this, as you can see, this project was just hugely formative for me. It was my first foray into organizational behavior research. It helped me fall in love with this type of research. And then it also helped kind of turn me into a responsible researcher, and that, it's really influenced how I think about research, the types of projects that I'm interested in and things like that. So I'm assuming that I am out of time, so we can, if we have any questions, we can go into those for sure.
Thank you, Anja. Looks like we might have a question or two for you.
Sure.
Chris, yeah.
Anja, thanks so much. We have a question from the audience. When you design a vignette, when you think about the process of doing that, what are the key factors that you need to pay attention to as you do that?
Obviously, the whole experimental kind of realism component of it, which we did run into that issue. One thing I want to note, and I mean, there's so much I can say. I could talk about this all day. It was a 12-minute presentation, so I couldn't get into all the details. But one thing to note is that, we in Ivona's lab, we always had, other research assistants and things like that who came from different kind of backgrounds and had different perspectives. So there was like people like me with a psych background. There was also another RA, Peter Fisher, who really helped us develop these materials. He had a business background and a computer science background, so he helped us kind of put those together. And he's now at Ryerson at the University in Toronto as an assistant professor. But Ivona also always had like MBA students who would volunteer as RAs as well. So we always had these like different perspectives and a lot of people that we could run our materials by. And I think that was very, very integral when it came to kind of putting all of this together and making sure it all looked realistic, it all kind of made sense, and all of that. So that's one thing I would definitely say. Get as much, get as many people's opinions as you can when it comes to this.
Perfect. Thank you. I know we have another couple questions here, but we do want to keep this webinar moving along. Luckily, you have a wonderful opportunity to continue asking questions of all of our authors here with us today. So for the next 30-ish minutes or so, we're going to move into 3 breakout rooms with Louise, with Anja, and with Ivona. We're going to talk more about their research designs and actually get at the question that Louise posed for us, kind of how do we use this? What kind of questions are important? We've put a couple of questions in the chat to get the conversation going. And we will let the authors take their breakout rooms for there. No one needs to do anything, just give it a second and all of you will be sent to one of the breakout rooms with our authors. Right. Hopefully we are all finding our way back to the main room. I know in our room, our conversation really got going and we got cut a little short there at the end. So hopefully all of you experienced a similar engaging conversation. We're going to take just a couple minutes and have our author leads summarize 1 or 2 key points or ideas that came out of the conversation, if they could do that. Let's see, I see Anja on my screen here. So maybe Anja, would you like to share with us what your room took away?
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of what we talked about was, at least in the beginning, was the types of research questions that, can, that really go with kind of the experimental vignette methodology that I talked about in my study. And again, we talked a lot about, getting into kind of the underlying mechanisms, the whys and the hows and things like that, and also for potentially like designing interventions as we did in our paper. Another thing that came up that I found really interesting, and also had a very similar experience in some of my other research, especially as a Canadian researcher who has conducted research in a Canadian context, is getting pushback from reviewers about the data that we have not being relevant to a US context, which we've gotten quite often, and we kind of have to prove that our research is actually relevant to the US, even though the opposite doesn't always occur. So, there's a lot of US based research out there that, and, nobody, would bat an eye in saying, or in kind of assuming that it's applicable to the rest of the world and things like that. And then another thing that we really talked about as well was, where to start with like putting together these types of materials, how to, make sure that they, work the way that you wanted to, how to, when do you conduct pilot studies, how do you get, feedback and things like that. So those are kind of the main themes of what we talked about.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I'll move over to Ivona next, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melissa. So I'll kind of start where Anja kind of left, and the first thing that kind of came up was the pilot studies, and actually what's the doubt to come up with a very strong methodology for vignettes. And one thing that did not kind of occur to me to talk about before is that, what you see in our main studies is the final product, but to get to that final product, you need multiple pilot studies to ensure that your methodology is strong and is portraying what you're hoping it would portray, and it's coming across. And if you see a paper with 3 main studies, that usually means there's another 5 pilot studies or so, making sure that these materials are actually what they're supposed to be. So there's all this background work that's not usually overly visible, and it looks like, experiments we can run very quickly without seeing the kind of the legwork that leads to the main studies. The other thing that we discussed for these pilot studies, convenience samples are more appropriate. And actually, it's better to use some of the convenience sample because you may need to run through a few versions of materials. You have like 2 or 3 pilot studies before you get to your main study. But then for your main studies, you definitely want an audience or participants to whom the research problem speaks to. So if there are entrepreneurs, so you want, or the research questions about the VC funding or entrepreneurship, you want a sample that actually comes from that setup or that context, because that's very important, in particular for publications in management journals. The other thing that we talked about is that realism in vignette studies for publication in management journals is very important. So sometimes you need to balance a little bit how strong, like how perfect your experimental methodology is, meaning how how everything's equal across the conditions. This is what we're trying with the experiments. We're trying to equalize condition, and only one thing varies between conditions, so they can establish that one thing that varies, like for example, length of a leaf, that's what's causing the effects. But sometimes you need to kind of balance that with what's a reality and what the stimulating material would actually look in reality, and that's very important, particularly for management type of research. And finally, one thing that we brought up and actually came from a talk at a summit a week ago that Anne actually brought up to our attention is that one thing that I talked about was that, you know, we all study different topics, and sometimes the topic, in particular in Anja's and my case, the topics are very controversial and contested all the time, you know, whether gender inequality exists to begin with. So people can argue all they want and contest the topic and the common message, but one thing they cannot argue about is the facts. If you have a very strong methodology, very rigorous methodology, and then these are your results. The results are what they are, and there is no argument about that you are showing this phenomenon and that you use very strong methodology. And that is what is most likely to lead to publication, especially for these topics where people usually tend to contest them. So I think a very strong methodology is extremely, extremely important, and I cannot emphasize that enough. Hope this helps. And I'm happy to answer any questions beyond this, this meeting as well.
Great, thank you so much. Louise, I know our conversation varied a little bit, it was very lively, but do you have a few thoughts to summarize for us?
I can't hear you, Luis. I don't know about others.
Oh, I think he's muted.
Someone mute me. Okay. So first of all, I felt bad for the people that were in my group, because clearly most attendants to this session are interested in the micro level things of these studies that we have discussed. But I was really interested about the part of the conversation that was related with the use of mixed methods, and what is the trends in top journals in the use, for instance, of experiments and archival data analysis. We discussed about the complexities that this entails in terms of finding the right, or creating the right research team. For instance, teaming up with people that are more aware about the specific research designs that are outside our area of expertise. But also we discuss about the complexities of the review process, right? Because if you send a study with mixed methods, chances are that there's going to be relatively complex for the journal to find the right reviewers. And a lot of people were in the process of finding research topics for their dissertations and even for their PhD programs. So some of them are pre-candidates. So hopefully this broader conversation that we have had in this event has inspired young minds toward responsible research. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that very well sums up much of the conversation in our room. Much appreciated. All right, so we have one final question for each of our authors who are here with us today. And that is really thinking about the work that you've done, specifically the paper that you presented. How has this research really shaped your broader research identity? And maybe tied into that, what's been the most inspiring outcome that you have experienced as a result of doing this work and specifically working on this paper? So Luis, I think I'm going to bounce it back to you first.
Okay, I was trying to answer a question in the chat. I'm sorry, Melissa. Could you repeat quickly what was the question?
No
Sorry
worries.
about that.
How has this paper shaped your research identity, and kind of what's the most inspiring outcome you've experienced as a result of doing this work, of working on this paper?
Yeah. So one thing, the first feedback that I got from my advisor, my dissertation advisor, a PhD advisor regarding this paper, there was the proposal for the third chapter of the dissertation is that you will never see this published. This is a true story. This is a true story. And with Henish, who I owe a lot of things in terms of my academic career, knows this very well. And this basically became a motivation for many of the things that I do in terms of research, because I think that there's some merit in terms of trying to tackle questions that are complex, and especially questions that are relevant for many stakeholders, not only companies. And for years and years and years, I mean, a strategy, right? Strategy of macro management and organizations for years and years and years, or fields have been fueled by an understanding of financial performance, what are the consequences for organizations. I think now it's time for opening the door for studies that tackle the other dimension, that is the social dimension. What are the implications of business activity? Yeah, the low-hanging fruit, which is still neglected in the literature, is prosocial behavior, what people call CSR. But there are other activities not in the non-market area that also affect society, right? And there's a question about efficiency, as James in our room was discussing. What is the efficiency of organizations? So this study was really the cornerstone of this motivation that will continue in my research agendas. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. Ivona, I will go back through the order. Back to you.
Sounds good. These are some excellent and intriguing questions. So one, in terms of my identity as a scholar in this area, this paper actually reinforced and definitely kind of gave a punch to me, like this is my identity now as a gender scholar and responsible researcher scholar. And the reason for this, although I've been doing this kind of work for a while, and I talked about this a little bit to the summit. So if somebody was at our RBM summit, so forgive me for hearing the same story, but as a doctoral student, I actually studied something totally different, which was emotions. And one of the main reasons for that, because I was heavily discouraged from studying gender because it's too controversial. I'm a woman, I have an accent, do I want other things to be stigmatized for, kind of thing. So I was highly, highly discouraged, but this was my passion. So when I actually entered my first job as assistant professor, I had this identity of, to me, as an emotion scholar. And I really tried, I'm not going to say get rid of that identity, but reinvent myself, that I'm somebody who I really care about social justice, social outcomes, in particular gender. And finally, I think this paper finally reinforced me, put me on a map, and finally people recognize me for this kind of work. And I kind of felt this was the point when I was welcomed to this kind of community. I'm like, I was recognized for this kind of scholar, despite of me having quite a number of years under my belt. But I guess I had too strong of a supervisor. My supervisor was Stefan Cote, an emotion researcher at the time. He studies inequality now as well. So I like to think I influenced him as well. Wishing. But so that's the identity part. The outcome. So I'd actually so there are many great outcomes. And one outcome is obviously training amazing doctoral students and seeing them how they are being prosperous and being really prolific and taking on this kind of work. So we kind of training our next leaders, thought leaders in this area. So that's been exciting to me. Like Anja is definitely here, and I would say an outcome here. But the other outcome that I received was totally unexpected. I actually wrote heavily about, so I realized the power of media engagement. And I started like writing about these issues, about my published research in more popular media outlets, including Harvard Business Review, but also including kind of national newspapers in Canada, like Globe and Mail, which are our major newspaper in Canada, and I got the attention from the government, from the federal government. So I had an op-ed piece in the Globe and Mail, and the federal government emailed me, hey, well, it seems like you know something about these leaves, and they were actually working on revisions of our parental leaves at a national level, so invited me to the advisory panel. So one really great outcome was actually that I felt that, you know, these were not just empty words on a piece of paper, but at the end of the day, they actually made their way through policy implication. And, you know, although not everything I said obviously was implemented, but some of it got to the decision makers' ears. And I was at that decision panel, which to me was a real outcome. This is the impact I'm looking for. I don't want to do papers just for the sake of doing papers that nobody's going to read and is going to collect dust, but I want to do work that tackles important questions facing our society, and it's going to hopefully benefit and help everyone collectively in our society that can actually speak to that. So to me, that was very empowering, and something that I really enjoyed. Although it's a lot of work, but finally seeing that outcome as well, in addition to, you know, training doctoral students. But those are two important points, I would say. So I'll stop at this point and let Anja also talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivona. And we'll pass it off to Anja.
First of all, thank you, Ivona. That's very sweet. But in terms, I mean, I think I spoke to this quite a bit or a little bit at least in my presentation. But you know, my interest in this research, like it's what made me excited about conducting research again. So I think I mentioned before, I was, you know, in a very different program. I had done a very different kind of thesis on a very different topic, and it was kind of losing its luster a little bit. And so this made me excited about research again. And then it really did shape kind of the way that I think about research, in the sense of like what kinds of questions that I am interested in now. So I'm very interested in, you know, gender equality, equity in the workplace, things like that. And you know, we've even recently conducted some, you know, COVID related kind of studies, you know, on the mistreatment of, you know, the AAPI community and things like that. So what really stands out to me about this research is just the impact that it can have on people's lives, and the ability to kind of allow people to be seen and heard, and to allow their kind of lived experiences to be seen and heard by other people and to be acknowledged by other people, is what really kind of drives my passion for this. And, you know, just echoing everything Ivona said as well about, you know, the policy side of things, in terms of the outcomes of this research, but also just, you know, in my conversations with people who have taken parental leaves, for example, a lot of women who have experienced these negative career outcomes, and hearing their stories, and, you know, it's wonderful to be, you know, to have people to be able to open up to me. And then even on the other side of things of, you know, men talking about, you know, how they wish they could have taken a parental leave, or, you know, how they wish they could have bonded with their child and things like that. So those are the things that really kind of stand out to me about this type of research, and that's what kind of holds it close to my heart. So.
Thank you. Thanks so much. So we do have just a couple of things left in conclusion, but before we do that, you'll notice in the chat that we have just a really short feedback survey. We'd like to do more events like this, and so we'd very much appreciate if you just take a minute or two and give us your thoughts and feedback on today's events. And then while you are working on that, I will turn the floor over to Anne, who's going to set up a short video about our RBM for us.
Yeah, I think I would like to give everybody a minute to do the survey. We really value your feedback, which will help us to improve how we design these experiences. The last feedback was very helpful. We made a lot of changes. For some of you who were here last time, you know, we made some changes and we'll continue to improve. So please click on that link and answer the questions for us, please. Okay. Appreciate that. Well, I don't see any thumbs up. So either you have finished way before or still working on it. So in the interest of time, we still have 3 or 4 minutes. So let me, oh, great. I see 1 thumbs up. That's great. And then maybe I'll give you another 10 seconds and I'll start the video. The video is about 2.5 minutes. It's titled Vision 2030. Yeah, Chris has the link on the website. All right, so let me go ahead and share screen and start the video. Share. All right, so I'll put it full screen. Ready? Go.
I think we may not be able to hear it. Do others struggle with that?
Yeah, so and the volume wasn't quite on for us. Should we try, would you like someone else?
When you share the video, there is an option to share the volume, the sound as well. So you just need to click there.
I'm sorry. Did you all, were you able to hear it?
No.
Ah, you didn't hear the sound. All right, so please tell me, where do I click to share the sound? Video.
Just the way you share the screen?
I did, I shared the screen, but I think I should set share sound on the video.
Yeah, there's a little check.
Hmm?
When you share the video, there's a check before you share. There's a check for the sound as well.
Where?
How about this? I'll try it. Can people see?
Perfect.
Thank you for that, Chris. So I would like to thank everyone for taking the time to be here with us today. I know for many of us, it is the end of the semester. For some of us, it is midday, but for others of us, it is the afternoon, the evening, or the middle of the night. So for those of you who've made the effort to be here, thank you so, so much. I would also like to thank our authors for being here and the wonderful insights that they have provided to us. I hope you all found them as inspiring as I certainly have in the last 90 minutes. If you have any questions, please feel free to throw those in chat here. We'll stay on just a minute or two before we check out. But if we could give just a round of applause, either virtually or otherwise, to our presenters today and just give them a huge, huge thank you for the work they've put in, for the time and effort that they have taken to be here. So thank you all. We hope to do this again in the future, and we hope to see you back at an event like this very, very soon. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much, everybody.
Bye, everyone.